Hello, my name is Blake, and this is
Blake.
And we are excited to welcome you guys to Three Trails Online. I'm so glad you guys are here with us to worship. And the reason why we have Blake here is that our church, we are all about disciples making disciples in our community. And years ago, like 2 years ago, it's kind of like when my 5-year-old says when I was a kid, like yesterday.
Seems so long, right?
Years ago, I got to see God working in Blake's life. And so now we see that God's, a call in his life to equip people. And so we're going to utilize Blake as much as we can. I think you always say, I'm like, hey, can you do this? And you're like, I will do anything.
Yeah, I'm a gun, you just point and I'll shoot.
Yeah. So he is on our teaching team, and we wanted to kind of work him in. And also, your expertise will fit great in today's sermon. And one of the things that Blake is transitioning into is he will be partnering with Stephanie and overseeing our youth. And so today, when we talk about the most important part of our service, the FDA moment, I'm going to let Blake kind of lead charge on that and kind of address our youth.
Yeah. So every week we try to ask you guys, the FDA moment. It means follower, disciple, apostle. At what point are you in the three trails that we talk about that you could be walking on in life? Whether you're following Jesus, whether you're a disciple of Jesus, or whether you're an apostle to Jesus. And so we really want to hear this week, though, from our youth, like, what does it look like right now to try and be in a follower, disciple, or apostle to your friends and family while you're stuck at home and you might not even see anyone. It's just your family. Yeah. So what are some of those simple things you can do at home to show that love of Christ to your family or your friends you might see on Zoom or talk to them while you're playing video games or who knows what?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a very unique time of life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and one of the things we want people to understand is that it is not like, hey, youth, when you get bigger one day, Jesus is real. It's like, no, like you are a follower now. You have a community now. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like having Blake and speaking on this, because I don't view our youth as an add-on.
No, absolutely.
Like you are our church. And so, and I love our younger generation. As we're talking about the book of Revelation, and we're talking about how God is leading us, right? Mm-hmm. We went to the first couple of chapters because Jesus is addressing the church. And he's going to address a church that is very similar to the culture of today.
Yeah.
All right, so basically starting from my generation and younger, they're kind of saying America, we're like the post-Christian, right? We're not as dogmatic on certain things. And honestly, when it comes to the younger generation, it does not matter which younger generation you are. The older generation always thinks it's your fault.
It's always our fault, It's not you. You did nothing wrong. My parents did nothing wrong. Your parents did nothing wrong. It all goes downhill.
Yeah. And so it doesn't matter, if you talk to someone, back in the 50s, it was the teenagers they were raising. And then in the 70s, it was it's always the young people. And so guys, I want you to know, it is not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, each generation, your weakness can also be a strength, and your strength can also be a weakness. And what I really see in today's culture, and what I love, is that they get the love and grace of Christ better than the previous generations. Man, they are just so accepting, and it really pushes me, because I feel like the previous generations, it was always about the standard of holiness, and a lot of things that we thought was holy really wasn't holy. It was church tradition. And this generation is like, no, why can't we embrace people and love people? And if someone's not a follower of Jesus, how can we cover them in love? And so I love that about our younger generation. But we see this in Sardis, is that what your strength is can also be your weakness, because if you're accepting all the time, well, there is a standard of God. Mm-hmm. And God does want to bless you. And so if you don't live to a standard, doesn't mean that God hates you. He can't bless you. And so as we dive into this, I want you to think of that as our younger generation. How do we balance that, right? Yeah. Okay, so Sardis, original city, it was wealthy. They had a very long past. And up until 17 AD, so we're probably in the 90 ADs, okay? But in 17 AD, there was a terrible earthquake that destroyed them and the city of Philadelphia. Well, when it destroyed them, the Roman Empire came in and rebuilt them. And so Sardis absolutely loved Rome. And they were passionate about the worship of the emperor or Caesar. And so there was this really strong worship of them. And so all throughout Sardis, it was this love affair with Caesar. But what also really showed with Sardis is that even though they loved the emperor, they were cool with whatever background you came from. And so, hey, you want to worship Caesar? Cool. Hey, you want to worship Artemis? Cool, go do that too. Like you do you, I do me, and let's just do life. And so,
don't get in my way, I won't get in your way.
Yeah, and that bled in even into the Jewish culture, where the Jews were highly accepted there. And so they actually were able to build this amazing synagogue. In most of these areas, the Jews were not allowed to do this, and they had prime real estate. And they built this amazing, it's the largest synagogue in the Asia Minor area because of the Sardis people. We argued about it, or we talked about this. Do we call them sardines, Sardians?
Yeah, I mean, it's more fun to say sardine above anything. So, got a little fish walking around.
Yeah.
But, the proper term is what, sardian, we think, or something like that?
Sure.
Yeah, who knows?
And if you guys are getting confused which one's Blake and which one's Blake, we were joking.
We have a solution.
Yes. When I was a kid, there was a TV show called Jake and the Fat Man. Mm-hmm. And so we'll call this Blake and the Fat Man, and you'll get to decide who gets to be Blake.
Yeah, put in the comments. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Which one's the Fat Man? We know which one's the bald man. And then
which one has the beard?
Yeah. It gets really confusing. Okay, so the Sardians were extremely acceptable. And we talked about this, Blake. What is unique with Christianity is that you're not born or raised in it. I mean, a lot of us are, but your relationship with God is a decision you make.
Yeah, it's not based at all on what your parents did. Like, you have 5 children and you and Megan are following Jesus, but that doesn't make any of your kids actually Christians.
Yeah, I want to live it out and point them that way, but eventually one day they will have to decide. A couple days ago, I was talking to one of my dad's friends who's Jewish. And I love it, and I'm trying to learn, and hey, they're a Jew. They're probably really good in the Old Testament, right? Like, let's talk about, because that's their faith and my faith, and we can connect. And so, like, I'm asking him all these questions, and he was like, he goes, you really know your faith. I really don't. And I'm like, so I asked him, I said, well, why do you think that is? And he goes, well, I'm Jewish because my mother was Jewish, and to the Jews, if whatever your mother is, that's what you are. Mm-hmm. And so I never had that choice. And so his whole culture is built on that. Well, as Christians, because it's a choice you need to make as an adult, or whatever age, I mean teenager or whatever, mm-hmm. you're bringing your baggage and your culture with you.
Yeah. Whatever you grew up with and what you know, that's how you've lived so far. So now that you're a Christian, you got to try and merge these two understandings of what the world is supposed to be like and how I'm supposed to talk to people and treat people. And now you have just this clash. And it's like, is this the right way? No, is this the right way?
Yeah, and we see that, I mean, from generation to generation, just like I said, like the older generation gets reverence and holiness mm-hmm. better than my generation and your generation, where your generation will get accepting and loving and grace better. Each generation is different. Each culture is different. Now, what was interesting, and the reason why we have this picture, is that the Jews were all about being Jewish, right? Like, they did not bring in the outside culture other than in Sardis. Mm-hmm. And so right here you have a lion and then you have an eagle, which are both symbols of Rome and Greece. And in this amazing synagogue, you actually see the names of the Jews, but they used their Greek version, which was they were very Greek and Roman cultured, which was they've been compromised. The other Jews would have looked at them as, you're not true Jews.
Right, they're not living up to the standard that they've set for all Jews, supposedly, but in Sardis, they're not doing that necessarily.
Yeah, they've compromised.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what the Sardines church Christians did. They brought that in with them. Where Christianity is very exclusive, like Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come to the Father except through me. And they would have said, well, that works for me, but hey, man, if you want to worship a goat or Caesar,
right on.
Go do. And we've talked about this, in previous cities, they had lost their jobs or they couldn't sell in the market. Mm-hmm. Where here, you can look at pictures of the Christians selling in the markets. And it was because they did compromise their faith.
Yeah, they wouldn't hold to the thing that God asked them to do. They were willing to squidge the line a little bit.
Yeah, so they are flourishing in the culture because they are not standing up for Jesus. Okay? So with that in mind, let's jump into it. So they're right here, they're right smack dab in the middle of Asia Minor. Sardis was a very large city, and this is what it says. It says, "Write to the angel of the church in Sardis. Thus says the one who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars, I know your works." So in all these letters, it starts with who he's talking to. So we know the Sardians, and we've talked about their background. But then we get a description of Jesus, and this one is really interesting because he's saying, listen, I've got the 7 spirits and I've got the 7 stars. Now, the 7 stars represented the 7 messengers or angels of the churches. And by saying that, Jesus is going, listen, I've got either your angel who represents you or your leadership, and I got them in my hand like I'm in control. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is letting them know, I'm the boss. And not only that, when it talks about the 7 spirits of God, he is referencing Isaiah 11. And we've talked about this before when we introduced the letter. And the reason why this is important is that the reason why the Messiah has all of these spirits, and these spirits are descriptions of wisdom and understanding. Why does Jesus have all these things? Because he is going to execute justice. So what Jesus is saying is the reason why he goes, hey, church, I want you to know I've got the 7 spirits. Sorry, I got kind of giving you the weather forecast over here. Good thing we got the 6 feet thing going. Yeah, okay. So he says, listen, I am going to execute justice on you. I'm going to look through it, and I'm not going to judge you on, because outwardly, this church looked like it was thriving. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, I'm going to go into what your eyes can't see, what your ears can't hear. I'm going to judge according to the law. And this is what's so cool about when Jesus is your king, is that he always has a righteous standard. It's not like, well, Blake, I'll let you do this. When I'm over here, Blake, I'll let you do this. No, he has a certain standard. And so he says, listen, I know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So what were they doing, Blake?
So they had this reputation, as we see here. If we read 3:1b to 2, you have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead. Be alert and strengthen what remains, which is about to die, for I have not found your works complete before my God. And so he said in the last verse, I know your works. And their works were, they have this reputation for being alive, but they're really dead. So they had this history, this great history of being this church that did phenomenal things in their community around them and truly wanted to love people and invite them. But they weren't really doing that anymore. They kind of had this past, and they keep pointing back to that. You guys remember when we did that carnival 10 years ago? It was incredible, right? You guys remember when we had a soup kitchen? Remember that? We don't do that anymore, but it was awesome back then, right? You remember those times? They were awesome.
Well, and talking about, as you were encouraging your teenagers, if we're not careful, well, remember when we did those things pre-COVID?
Yeah.
So guess what? We still have to make disciples.
We have to find ways to be creative and figure it out. But it showed that now they aren't really doing those things. And they've compromised in so many different areas that they've really kind of squeezed out what God had for them and what he was trying to get them to do. So now they're really not alive anymore, but they're walking around dead and they don't even really realize that. And so he tells them to be alert and strengthen what remains. So he's saying that in this church, there is a fragment left. There's something still there that he truly can work with. And he's like, we need to work on that and build that back up though. And so, because if they don't, it's going to go away and it's going to die completely. And so he just wants them to focus in on that. And so that's really where they've gotten to with these works, and they've kind of quit doing anything.
And to kind of tie it back in, what was the uniqueness, or what is the uniqueness about followers of Christ? What makes us complete?
What makes us complete is the Spirit that God has given us, yeah?
Yeah, and so I think the Spirit and Jesus, like they've compromised the uniqueness of God.
Yeah, and they had decided to, at this point, they're kind of rejecting Jesus by accepting all of these other things into their lives. And as Christians, we have to live this balance that can be very hard to live out sometimes because you go to work and you got all these people around you that are not Christians and they're trying to get you to do these things and you're slowly kind of walking towards their circle and trying to fit in with them maybe just to be more comfortable. So you have to live out this balance of truly having that one foot in the world and having that one foot in the church and loving Jesus and living that out daily. But you can't just be in the church or else you're not going to influence anyone in the world. And if you're in the world, then you're not going to be able to do anything for Jesus.
Yeah, and I feel like, talking to your youth, like I think you and I could both, going back to our youth, Your trip is not as long as mine. But back when I had hair, balancing that, right? Like knowing I want to live for Jesus, but I think as when you're young in your faith, people throw around that term, oh, you think you're better than me, you're holier than thou, right? Like we never talk in the King James English until we say holier than thou, right? And there is that balance, and I think we're going to be really diving into that of how do you live in a culture like now.
And so there are not necessarily right and wrong answers, but sometimes you'll see someone doing something that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And so as a Christian, we can walk up and say, hey, that's the wrong thing to do. And does that help them?
Yeah.
A little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah,
But if we don't give them a direction to move into, they're probably just going to end up in another spot that they shouldn't be in. So we have to be sure that we don't just point them away from this thing, or else they're going to wander aimlessly. We have to be sure to point them to Jesus and say, that's the way you should go.
And I think that is so powerful because, I think you can go to someone and say, stop doing that. But if you don't tell them what to start doing, or I would say more importantly, to who you should point them to. And I would say that older generation, you guys were really good at trying to point us away from the things that harmed us. And let's be honest, the reason why our mom and dads in our older generation told us not to was that they dabbled with it too, and they had the scars.
Yeah.
But maybe they took the more harsher approach, and instead of thinking of pointing me to Jesus, they were like, "Stop doing those works." Stop doing that. That's bad. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna see it as Jesus walks us out. He goes, "Remember then what you've received and heard, keep it and repent." And what I love about this is that you notice, because I feel like sometimes when people think of God, they think of His first response as anger and judgment.
Right.
And it's not. It's grace. Mm-hmm. And he's literally saying, hey, remember what I've told you? Like this is not new to them. They would have known through their relationship that this is something that God has been working on them for a while. And he says, if you are not alert, I'm going to come like a thief. You have no idea at what hour I will come upon you. But you do have a few people in Sardis who have not defiled their clothes, and they will walk with me in white because they are worthy. So he references something. Now, we may go to Jesus' reference of his coming back. It'll be like a thief in the night.
Right.
But he's actually talking about the Sardis' history. So when they were built, they had this amazing wall built around them. And they were kind of egotistical, like we are impenetrable, like no one can get inside.
We're a fortress. Who's coming in here to bother us?
We're good.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a story of when the Persians came in, they surrounded the city, and you're not getting in. Like we're good.
Mm-hmm. Have fun out there. We'll be in here.
Yeah. And so what they did is they watched the gates, and they watched the gates, and they watched the gates, and then one day, the legend goes is that the guard, and I love this story, the guard, his hat falls. And I don't know if it was like his lucky hat or like he was known for losing his hat.
Maybe he'd get in trouble for losing it. Who knows? But yeah.
So the hat falls. So he goes down through a secret door, out a secret door, grabs his hat, puts it on, goes back in. Well, now they know how to get into the wall.
Persians saw exactly what happened.
And that's how they broke in.
Yeah.
That guard was not very alert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows how much trouble he was going to get in maybe for losing his hat or maybe his lucky hat, but I think he's going to get in a lot more trouble for letting the Persians into the city.
Well, and I think, in talking about our Christian faith, isn't that what happens sometimes? We're caught in the moment, like the hat falling, and we're not thinking big picture.
I got to go do that right now.
And so we may not be purposely neglecting our relationship or purposely not pointing people to Jesus. We're just too busy collecting the hat to notice that we're not really being alert to the people who are about to invade our city.
Yeah, you got to be sure that in grabbing your hat, you're not letting in the Persians, in your own life.
Yes, yeah. And what's really, really interesting is that this happened twice. Yeah. Now, not the guard one. A couple years later, they rebuilt, and they're surrounded again. And this time, it's the Medes, and they're looking, and they're like, we can't get through. Well, they noticed that there were vultures in a certain part of the wall. And so they went to that part of the wall, and that is where the Sardis would throw their bodies out of the city so there wouldn't be dead bodies and disease spreading through the city. Mm-hmm. Well, they noticed that because that was the area where the dead bodies were thrown, there were no guards. And that is the exact part of the area that they broke into.
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying, listen, your city has a reputation for not paying attention.
Right.
Be alert.
Yeah.
And so he says, guys, be alert. Now, what does he want them to be alert to? And he says, listen, verse 4, you do have a few people in Sardis who have not defiled their clothes. All throughout the Bible, the term white and white linen and putting those two together is the idea of holiness. Okay, you were not being defiled by the world. And so what was happening is he's basically saying, listen, Sardis, you're in the world, but you're so close to it that it's starting to rub on you. Mm-hmm. And you're starting to, and I think that's that balance we talk about is influencing the world, but there will come a time and point where the world starts defiling you, and you gotta balance it. And he says, listen, if you can balance it, they will walk white with me because they are worthy. And we know that one day, listen, our holiness, our righteousness is not our own. It's been given to us by Jesus. And he's literally saying one day, if you keep living and doing what I'm asking you to do, you're going to live out this righteousness in every aspect of your life, especially in God's eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
All right, so go with us to the next passage.
Yeah, and so here we see, he's still talking about those people in white. He's saying, the one who conquers will be dressed in white clothes, and I will never erase his name from the book of life, but will acknowledge his name before my Father and before his angels. So he's saying that person who has decided to keep their lives kind of separated and compartmentalized, where they have this area where they're still influencing the world, but they're keeping themselves pure and holy, that person's going to be able to walk in victory and to conquer over sin in a way that the people who decide to compromise, they just can't, because they've consistently let in the wrong things into their lives. They let the Persians into their city, and they've decided to not live the way that God has asked us to. And so whenever you decide to live in victory like that, you get to live in God's kingdom, like you were talking about, in that eternal kingdom on a different level that is, we can't really fathom, but it's going to be incredible one day if we decide to live that way.
No, it is. And so you and I were talking about this too. So what's all this talk about the book of life and not having your name erased from it?
So the book of life is the thing referenced in Revelation later on, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so then we have this book of life that whenever you decide to follow Jesus, your name gets written down in it, and it can't be taken out of it. You've made this decision that will never be changed because you've decided to follow the one true King, this incredible decision that is, again, going to impact your eternity in an incredible way. And
what's cool, too, is that he's actually referencing something that they would have understood because all cities had registries. And the citizens who they allowed to stay citizens were written in that registry. Mm-hmm. But if you were a hooligan that did shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
They would cut you out of the city and they would take your name out of the book of life or the book of the registry. Mm-hmm. And so I just wondered, because the eternal kingdom is talking about, the New Jerusalem and an eternal kingdom. And he's probably referencing both, where they would have understood, like, you want to be in that registry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is all about what Jesus says. And so continue on the end of that passage.
That last verse there is in verse 6, where it says, let anyone who has ears to hear listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. So you've got the Spirit of Jesus speaking to the churches, and this is the church in Sardis. And all of these, where it says that at the end of their little segment, that's also a very similar phrasing used in Matthew 13:9, where it's let anyone who has ears hear and let them listen. And so he's really... And we know that parable there is actually the parable of the sower.
Yeah.
And so it's about the seed going out on different soil, and it gets rejected here, it gets choked out here, and it's just on hard ground here, but it grows in one area. And so the thing is, we can be the people who spread the seed and help with that, but we can't cater to the ground necessarily. And that's exactly what they were doing at Sardis. We can't be like, oh, well, it's a little, it's like weeds there, so we don't want to choke it out, so let's kind of move our direction towards them and make them happy, which is not what we want to do.
Yeah, you can't change the message. And I kind of feel like, we talk about this a lot in our church, is I feel like the last couple hundred years, we've kind of not completely changed the gospel, but it went from follow Jesus because he's king, he's going to come back and set up his kingdom and resurrect you into his kingdom. It turned into pray this prayer and go to heaven.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to go to someone and say, hey, do you want to go to eternal punishment or eternal delight? Which one would you like?
That's an easy decision, let me tell you. Yeah. I want delight, please.
Yeah. Or do I go to you and go, hey, listen, there's a God I can't prove to you, and he's the king of the world, and he proved it by dying on a tree and resurrecting. Stop leading your life and one day he will resurrect your dead body into his kingdom.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, that's.
You sound crazy.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like our message of Jesus being the King of the world is very hard to take. Because I don't know about you, but I kind of like doing things my way.
Oh, absolutely.
So
it's more fun to do it that way,
So we're in this culture, right? And we've talked about this. So we want to take, and what I love about this culture, this city of Sardis, is I do think this is our generation. We live in a generation where the good aspects is we're more accepting. And we've talked about this. Like I remember as a child, it was almost like taboo or edgy when you saw two people from different races dating. Like, oh, like, oh my goodness. But now it's like, it's almost, it's not even edgy where you've got, the LGBT movement and all this stuff. And a lot of the older generations, they're looking at our generation and they're just like, how has America become so evil and wicked, and we want to make America like godly again and Christian again and all this stuff. So how do we apply this message to us? And I want to discuss two questions. How did we get here?
Well, I'd say that we got here really because people have friends in their lives, non-believers, that have seen them say, hey, I'm a Christian and this is how I want to live my life and these are the things that I'm supposed to do. And then that other person might be like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm going to try that out. But then they go find you doing exactly what you said you're not supposed to be doing. It's like, so you're trying to sell me on Jesus, but you don't even seem like you're really sold on him. So I'm going to go ahead and not do that anymore. It's very easy to reject something that the person who's selling it to you doesn't really believe in.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that in my own life where it's like, you say you follow Jesus, but then you see maybe how your parents follow. I think for a lot of Christians, this generation, we're looking back at our American history. And it's interesting because, for the older generation, they want to be like, we were so godly. And I think I told you this story where I was down in Florida where my wife grew up, and this older gentleman came up, and I think he was praying for the offering, right? And he was like, I just wish you guys could have saw how godly we were back in the 50s and 60s in the South. And I'm like,
I bet it looked a little different back then.
Yeah, and I just think, and it's not, I know people are like, oh, that's not us, and stop judging our past. But I think, people are looking at our past, and they saw that, the church split over slavery, and there was, the church that said, we want to keep slaves. People saw that. And so people saw, Christians saying this and that, and I think that we lost our credibility. And I think the younger generation is going, like you said, you yourself isn't doing this.
Right.
And I think also we need to be humble, even from my generation to the next. If it was so good, why did they reject it? And it may be because they didn't see that it was good, or we did a terrible job of letting them see it was good. Or you can just say, well, that younger generation is dumb and stupid and idiotic, which we do.
Yeah,
right?
Always.
Which is very, we loved that. Like I loved it when, the older generation did it to me, and that's the best way to win a generation.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, you think I do everything wrong? Let's be friends. Yeah. We're going to get along real well.
Yeah. Let's just make fun of you all the time.
Exactly.
You'll love it. Okay, so I do think, and you may disagree, that we got here differently, but we are here. Okay? So now that we are here, how do we influence people that are like that they're like, you do you, whatever. And one of the reasons why I love doing this lesson with you is that's kind of your testimony. Like I remember I was a middle school pastor and Blake was in high school. And you kind of remember people who have the same name as you, right? So and I saw pictures of him when he was like 5, and he literally looks like my son. And I showed him, and it's like, holy, like, did we clone you? But I remember seeing him, and so when he graduated, I'd always see his dad at different places, and I'd be like, hey, Nick, what's going on with Blake? And he'd be like, well, I mean, let's be honest, and he'd be like, he's not doing well.
I wasn't. It's true.
Yeah, you weren't. And so kind of tell us, where were you, and what took you, or what was that thing that brought you out of you doing you?
So at the time, I had probably, my guess, I think you told me that at one point my dad had told you, hey, you just got hired on at Costco. And I still wasn't in my best shape at the time as far as my spiritual and beliefs. But, I still went to church and that kind of stuff, and just more to appease my parents than anything, I'd say. But I was just kind of living for the world and kind of really enjoyed imbibing in things that I shouldn't have, whether that be illegal things or legal things. Who knows? I know.
I think we know.
And so I was just kind of moving along in this life, and I wasn't really aiming in any direction and trying to accomplish anything. And then this great, just shake happened in my life that made me go, what am I doing? And that was the death of my sister. And so it wasn't that her just dying really opened my eyes. It was, she had a visitation that we were supposed to be there for about 2 hours.
And she was your older sister.
She was my older sister, yeah.
And she was kind of driven and about ready to graduate.
She always kind of had an idea of where she was going. She might change it 4 times a week, but she always had a thought of where she was going.
Yeah.
She had a plan and something, even if it changed all the time, but she always was going somewhere. And so the thing is, I didn't. I was just like, I'm just going to work at Costco, maybe get a business degree and see what I can do here. But when she died, we were at that visitation for about, it feels like 5 or 6 hours. Many people showed up. I worked that visitation. Yeah, and so you saw how many people showed up, wrapped around that building. It was incredible. And so many people came up to our family and they were saying to us, I wouldn't have known God or Jesus if it wasn't for her in my life. And so that's little steps that she was helping people move along that FDA process, truly, that we talk about every single week. And so I can almost guarantee that not a single person would have said anything similar to that if it had been me that passed away.
I think Blake's a good guy, but
what influence? What did I do to change anyone or to help anyone move towards the kingdom? And so it was really just seeing how she had lived her life. And so the thing is that she knew that I didn't do the right thing all the time, and I knew that she didn't do the right thing all the time. But she was making attempts to do the right thing at least. And I was just kind of, again, not doing really anything.
But it was who she pointed people to.
Exactly. So she lived that kind of life, and that changed my life because she was willing to ask me hard questions sometimes. And then I'd just be like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, and it showed that she cared, but it just really got me every once in a while to think about, maybe I should go back and do that? No. But as she kept trying to reach out to me, no matter what I was doing.
And it wasn't just like, hey, stop that.
No, not at all.
But it was more of a point towards.
Mm-hmm. She's kind of like, you might want to think about your decisions and think about not doing those things sometimes.
And so I don't want you to, so this is not a, when we look at our culture, it's not a, we get over it. Like, it's okay that they're aborting kids, or it's okay that they're doing things against the Bible, or it's okay that that's not it at all. But if my only interaction with you is me telling you you're wrong.
Not going to love that too much, not going to lie.
No. And you may say, well, that's, but they need to know. And I would argue just like, they need to know Jesus more than they need to know all the bad things they're doing. Because when they see Jesus, and honestly, I think if they see Jesus in you, like you saw Jesus in your sister, not perfection, but they see Jesus in you, then he's the one who is attracted. Like he's the one that you want to be like.
Yeah.
And so I think if people just see you as a normal person, but they see something different in you, and that difference is not just, well, they don't smoke and chew and goes with girls who do, they love Jesus.
Yeah, and like you said, it goes back to not just pointing them away from the wrong thing, but pointing them to Jesus every single time and not ever changing your goal. Because if they say you change your goal, they're going to be like, oh, well, he doesn't really care about that.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, when you meet your Savior or the Savior, the King of the world, he's not going to go, okay, hey, listen, I'm going to let you in, but what is your view on weed? Hey, I'm going to let you in, but were you sexually pure? Hey, I'll let you in, but who did you vote for in that 2020 election?
Are you sure he's not going to say that?
He may. He will probably definitely ask you if you like Chick-fil-A or not.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So he's going to say, did you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
And not that all those things are not important, but when you're pursuing Jesus, guess what you start doing? You start doing those right things.
Yeah. And is he going to ask if you followed him perfectly, though?
No. Because remember, he's the one who gives you the white clothes. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we just point people in that direction, Because again, if I come to you and say, listen, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, but I know someone who doesn't, guess what? His first response to you is always grace, not judgment. It's going to probably change the way you view God.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Will you close us in prayer and we'll wrap this up?
Mm-hmm. Father, thank you for this day and this opportunity for Blake and I to share a message on the church in Sardis and how it was so similar to our culture today. I pray that you would help everyone to truly just point people to Jesus and to take those good parts from all the generations that we've seen, where there's some that are accepting and there are some that are focused on holiness, and we get the right mesh to truly just show you to the world so that we can point people back to your kingdom and to show them who you really are, and that we can truly be 100% bought into what we say we believe in. It's in your holy name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us and from listening. It was actually fun to be with Blake and the Fat Man. So whoever that was, we want to encourage you guys that this coming up Wednesday, or gals, we will be
no
having
guys at this one.
Yes. Now, if it's actually not colder than a freezer, we will be meeting again. So just be paying attention on Facebook. We'll let you know if we're staying all virtual or in person. And then just FYI, on the 24th, which is usually our men's, we're going to be having a business meeting for our church members because there's some really cool stuff that's about ready to happen.
And we want awesome.
Yeah, and we want everyone to know, but we can't know until it happens. So February 24th, it's a Wednesday, 6:30. We'll get more information. There'll be a meeting, a link, all those fun things. Also, I swear every time I see this, I think of my son Owen in the background going, but because that's what the noise.
That's exactly what I can
And
imagine.
now Brantley's probably going to make like that cat noise for your first sermon, or Owen's noise if he can get that. But yeah, so Lacey does a great job every Sunday at 11. She brings a great lesson, and I love that it's a tool that we can use to pass our faith on to the next generation so that they can make that decision for themselves.
And it was awesome because this last week, didn't somebody say that they had a friend connect to them and say Lacey's lesson for this adult was exactly what they needed to hear?
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So guys, and I think that goes back to the condition of the heart. Not that they were childish, but like if you teach the word, people will respond. Well, guys, thank you so much. It was awesome hanging out with you like always, and we will see you guys next week.
Absolutely.